we continue our month-long awareness campaign on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Each Tuesday in the month of September, we've called it International Tuesday, focused on the global fight to defeat Duchenne. Today, it's my sincere pleasure to welcome a longtime friend of Jesse's journey, Pat Furlong. Pat is the founder of Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy in the United States, as well as co-founder of the World Duchenne Organization. Welcome to the program today, Pat.
Thank you, Perry. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks for including me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. As I said, you are a longtime friend of Jesse's journey in many ways. And I know sort of the PPMD story started around the same time as Jesse's journey. Maybe you could share a little bit more with us.
Sure. Gosh, I met your founder a long time ago when we both had a diagnosis of our sons and we were searching for opportunities for clinical trials or treatment. So we met in Memphis, Tennessee, a very long time ago, looking at stem cell therapy to see if that would offer our children, our son, my two sons, and his son, one son, any potential therapy. So along the way, we found, I think, as parents, when we first looked at that, it sounded promising because the concept back then was to deliver immature or immature muscle cells into cells, right, into your muscle, and with the idea that those cells would integrate and then restore muscle function, right? What we learned is that those cells really didn't integrate, and there was an inflammatory response. So really, the therapy wasn't viable. So John went his way, and I went my way, and he went back to Canada, and I went to the United States. And I think, together we had some communication about what could we do, and I said I was going to start something in the U.S. And actually, our first meeting was one we had together long ago at Robarts Research Institute in Canada. So we started there. And at the time, I brought the parents that I knew, which were a very small number of people. And John came because he hadn't really reached out to other parents. So we had a number of questions about how well is the disease characterized and what could we do. And one of the more well-known people that we'll still remember is Eric Kaufman was there. And I recall him talking about centers of excellence. And if we created or developed these centers of excellence and began investing in really characterizing the disease, we could make progress. So he went to Canada, we were in Canada. I went back home and started PPMD, and then he launched Jesse's journey.
Founding PPMD, what was it? I mean, the pillars of PPMD are research, care, and advocacy, and I think they probably have been for a long period of time. Maybe we can take those one at a time. So talk to us about research, because I know that PPMD has proudly funded over $50 million into Duchenne research, I believe it is at this point, which is a staggering amount of money. But how has that evolved over time and the focus for you from sort of the mid-90s to now?
Sure. So when we met with researchers in Canada, and then we had a follow-on meeting in the United States as well to really talk about what do we know about this disease, how well characterized is the disease, and what do we need to know? And one of the biggest sort of hurdles that they described at that time was the fact that there weren't at the time critical masses of investigators working together collaboratively. Right. So they posed this idea to us of centers of excellence and centers of excellence looking at downstream, looking at inflammation and fibrosis, centers of excellence looking at restoring the protein missing that's dystrophin. So we thought about that a lot, and we started off by really developing with individuals in research two centers of excellence. One was the DMDRC, Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Research Center at the University of Pittsburgh, under the direction of Eric Kaufman, to look at cell and gene therapy, because he had a critical mass of people in Pittsburgh at the time that were looking at cell and gene therapy. We then went out to UCLA and developed a second DMDRC, and that was to look at downstream, to look at fibrosis and inflammation, and that was under the direction of Jim Tidball. In our early days, then, our first commitments were at that time considered, in today's world, pretty small, $300,000 a year to each of those centers for 5 years running. At the same time, I had met Lee Sweeney at the University of Pennsylvania, and we talked about this. And Lee suggested to me that it's not it's terrific to start the DMDRCs, but it's not enough money to really move the field. And we talked a lot about how do you do that? How do you leverage money? How do you think about that? So Lee recommended at the time, he said, the National Institutes of Health which is the largest research enterprise in the world, doesn't really spend any money on rare disease, let alone Duchenne. So he talked about the fact that is the timing right for us to begin to encourage the NIH to invest in Duchenne? So we went to Washington, D.C. We were able to leverage a small meeting on Duchenne. It was the first time ever that the NIH held a meeting on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It was really led by the late Dr. Katz, who ran the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal, one of the institutes responsible. So following that meeting, I had met Joel Wood, who's the father of another young man with Duchenne, and asked him, how does it work? And he said, well, we should think about writing legislation. So together, Joel and I and Lee met with some lobbyists or consultants in Washington and said, how do we think about this? So sort of on the back of the envelope, we talked about what would we like to see accomplished. We thought centers of excellence because we were already doing that. We also thought about standards of care, right? How best do we use known medical tools to improve the care and hopefully lifespan of these individuals? And then a plan. As you characterize a disease, you evolve that plan so you know where the gaps are so you can fund them. So this was actually in 1995 and 96, and by 2000 we had hired consultants in Washington. We wrote this piece of legislation, the standards of care, the research centers, and the research plan. And that was introduced into the House and Senate in 2001 on February 14th. It was passed and signed into law by George W. Bush in December, that same December. So from then until now, the investment of the NIH and Department of Defense has been $600 million. So we look at it as leverage, right? Our investments are seed investments. They are to encourage good ideas, to encourage basic data, and then leverage the NIH investment and the Department of Defense investment. Our investments have touched every single therapy that's in development today. And I think that's how we as advocacy organizations have to look at how do you leverage money, because there isn't enough money to really drive therapy development unless you can leverage. So the NIH Department of Defense investment was pretty terrific. It is still ongoing. We have 6 centers of excellence. Standards of care were published, or care considerations, in 2010 and 2018. We still have these centers of excellence. And I think that as we look at that, then we were able to give seed money to spin off companies. And so invest in these small companies so that they can grow up and evolve so that they can get into clinical trials.
Amazing. Research, care, and advocacy, the 3 pillars that really have evolved over time, but incredible in what has been done by PPMD in the world of Duchenne for the community of the Duchenne community around the world. In addition, you are a great, you and everyone at PPMD are always so collaborative and willing to work with others. And it's also seen in how you ended up being a co-founder of the World Duchenne Organization. What's so important about the World Duchenne Organization, and why is it important for us to collaborate so much?
I think, first of all, I think it takes a village to get things done, right? So I think that by definition, we are collaborators. We should be collaborators, and we should think about it. The second thing is children with Duchenne or Becker muscular dystrophy live all over the world. So geography shouldn't mean a difference in care. Geography shouldn't mean you don't have any access to genetic testing, for instance, or counseling, or as therapies become approved, you don't have access. So I think World Duchenne Organization serves this purpose of really collaborating with the world and wrapping their arms around people who don't have access, people who do have access, and figuring out how do we work together to leverage what we're doing so that it is expanding to all people. I don't think any child should, or any individual with this diagnosis should be left out because of where they live, the culture they have, the language they speak, or the beliefs that they have. I think all need opportunities. And so Elizabeth and I talked about that a long time. And I will say, we thought about that when we first were young in this, right? And way back in 1994, we always talked about we'd like to be global, but you have to think about what does that mean? And we were too young and trying to figure out what do we need to do in our countries before we could think about what to do to help others. So I think that as we got to know each other, I knew John and Elizabeth and all of us come together, we thought now's the time to form World Duchenne Organization so that we can embrace real globally our markets and bring our patients together so that they can learn from each other, benefit from each other, participate in trials, have access to therapies, all of it. So I think collaboration and looking at what we can give is really important.
Well, on behalf of the Duchenne community in Canada, I want to thank you for that kind of collaboration, because it is so important for us to feel like we're part of a larger thing in this and give hope to families. So on the drug development side, from your perspective today, Pat, talk to us a little bit about the state of the drug development and the hope for families looking forward.
So right now we have more than 46 companies developing therapies for Duchenne, or potential therapies. We certainly have many companies in the downstream looking at fibrosis and inflammation and how to slow down disease progression. As you know, Perry, the gene therapy studies have opened up as well. Those are in early days. We're just learning about gene therapy and what that microdystrophin will do. So I think that's very exciting for families to look at, knowing that they're small cohorts. They're usually young at this moment, and we're all waiting to see. And then in terms of the antisense oligonucleotides, I believe that parents, and I certainly feel that expressing dystrophin or replacing it with a microdystrophin is sort of the basis of trying to change this curve of this disease. So when we look at the antisense oligonucleotides, we certainly in the US, we have 4 approvals with NS Pharma and 3 with Sarepta. But now we're seeing other companies come on with 2nd generation and 3rd generation antisense, ways to deliver this antisense that will be safe and more efficient than the early days. So I think what we're seeing is those few basic steps are really leading to a lot of competition and a lot of interest in the area and growing interest. And then one day, CRISPR technology will be in the clinic. So I think there's a great deal of hope. When John and I started so many years ago, there wasn't a single company. And now to think there's a growing number at 46, there's 5 companies in gene therapy, and that's growing. There's 4 or 5 companies in CRISPR. There's all of these companies looking at how best can we develop therapies for Duchenne and Becker. And what I think is also very important here is to understand that we're going to need a combination of therapies. So we have to not only get the approvals, but then think through what's next. How do we get combination therapies? Because our end goal is to defeat Duchenne, right? To end the progression of Duchenne for every single individual that's diagnosed.
I know that having spoken with you before, oftentimes when a family is receiving the diagnosis across the United States, they reach out and you call them back and speak with them. How has that conversation changed over a period of time and in more like the last 10 or 15 years versus in the early days?
Well, so each year we hold an annual conference, and we always have analysis of the conference in terms of what did we learn, what were the current themes, what was happening. And so I think 10 years ago in the conference, what we learned is probably even 15 years ago, when families came, they would say to us, there's a code. And the code is, what is your mutation and are you amenable? Because that's when exon skipping therapies were just in clinical trial, right? So they felt like you had this code, and if you were amenable to 51 skipping, 53 skipping, 45 skipping, 44 skipping, that, and other skips such as 8 and 50 and 52, that you would have this possibility. And so people that had a mutation that was not amenable to an exon skip felt pretty much out of the loop at that time. So I think what the conversation has changed now is, first of all, the disease is well characterized. We're going to look at your mutation and understand what therapies might be best for you to think about, what you might be eligible for in terms of it. Is it exon skipping? Is it by age and stage? How do we think about trials that could be much more inclusive of age and stage, not leave out or focus on a certain cohort? So I think the discussion has changed now to, where is my care? What kind of optimal care should I expect? I should expect an interdisciplinary team to deliver that care. I should be comfortable. I should have access to clinical trials, and that interdisciplinary team know about the clinical trials that might be an opportunity for participation, know about approvals. I think the other thing that has changed is advocacy. Yes. I think when you're first diagnosed, or at least long ago when my boys were diagnosed, I wondered if any parent's voice would ever count, right? And I think back then, and sometimes when you get a diagnosis, you think you're all alone. I think there's a feeling that you're not alone. You have a huge village, global in fact, behind you, and your voice counts. And so you can go to your government representatives and you can have a conversation about what living with Duchenne looks like. You can go to the regulators and talk about living with, and what matters to you in terms of your priorities needs to matter to them as they weigh these submissions for approval that come their way. So I think what the conversation is you matter, your voice matters, your son will have the best care and treatment possible, and we as a village together will drive therapies, and his life will be far different than the prognosis that might have been handed to you.
Well said. Well said. What's your immediate hope of the next 3 to 5 years when we look short window like that?
3 to 5 years, I hope we see an approval in gene therapy, and I hope we see approvals in the downstream and more exon skipping drugs. And I hope we are thinking through how to combine them. And I think that even more than that, what I want is that I know that in gene therapy studies, for example, we're seeing international families who move to another country or want to, and often they're unable based on just the finances of moving to another country and the burdens of participation. I hope in the next 5 years, we find solutions so that people aren't locked out because of where they live. It's not appropriate. I think we are good collaborators together, and I think it's our mission and vision that we want all opportunities for everyone diagnosed.
Excellent. Pat, thank you very much. Thank you mostly from the Duchenne community for all that you have done and for participating with us in a collaborative way, you and your team. We enjoy every opportunity we have to work together, and we feel like we're in this with you as well, and hope that we can bring something to the table for the Canadian community. So thank you for sharing your time today. Thanks for all that you do and for thinking of us. So,
Perry, we love working with you. We love this community. It's not one any of us probably wanted to join, but you know, once you're there, it's a good community. And we're good partners. So thank you for including us.
Thanks for being with us on International Tuesday. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Pat. Take care.
Bye, Perry.